Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. This is Andrew Turner, founder and host of the G&T Sessions podcast. And today we have a special edition of the episode today. And this was triggered by a little bit of information that was released a few weeks ago. So I just thought I couldn't not miss the opportunity of getting Aaron and Mike together. So welcome, Aaron and Mike. We'll go into introductions in a second to talk about that kind of really, I suppose, it depends on where you're looking from, but that sexy topic called cybersecurity and cyber. And SEC and all those funky FLAs and TLAs that we're doing in the tech world. But welcome, Aaron Spradlin, welcome, Mike Hallett, and we're going to jump straight into it. So what happened a few weeks ago, about 10 days ago actually, was as you know from the G&T sessions, we kind of bring together some people in the industry to talk about hot topics. And there was a particular bit of information I think Mike shared around something that the SEC in the US had actually released to do with cyber incidents, which I think maybe Mike and Alan, if you do an introduction and then we can jump into it, was particularly interesting, I think. And it's like a ongoing topic about data and about privacy and about how you protect yourself as a business. So we just thought we'd get together and have a bit of a chat today. So thanks for joining the show. And I suppose, to just kick it off, Mike, do you want to just introduce yourself and then we'll get into the meat and two veg?
Yeah, certainly. I'm the CEO and a board member with Cleverdome. I go way back with Aaron to a different era where I co-founded a company that's at a Tata, and Aaron will talk about how you bring some very unique technologies and processes together and people. And we have constructed what we think is a very strong solution for many industries, particularly finance, obviously, because that's where our expertise started. But that's who I am, and just this whole regulatory, non-regulatory challenge, of people who are regulated and people who are not regulated, and data being transferred to and fro across the open internet. We believe we've solved that problem, and Aaron will talk in much more detail about it because he's certainly the expert.
Thanks, Mike. Aaron.
Yes, sir. So my name is Aaron Spradlin. I'm the Chief Information Officer at United Planners Financial Services. We're a wealth management broker-dealer here in the United States, and we are, got to say, a promotion for our firm. We're a fiercely independent firm, so our advisors actually at our firm, which is unique to the story, by the way, is our advisors are independent financial service advisors, and they are actually the primary owners of the firm I work for. And so we're an employee-owned, advisor-owned firm, so a very unique structure. And so that's what I do. And then in my capacity there, ran into some challenges that the SEC is, trying to put a voice to. And while many years ago came up with what we felt was a novel solution to the problem, and kind of led to my partnership with Mike and the founding of Cleverdome, and currently a board member there, working with Mike.
And the phrase I think you used before we came on today's show was this, or today's episode was this thing called solving the unsolvable.
Yes.
So,
yes.
so I remember actually back to my days when I was at GE many years ago, before I got into this damn software industry I'm now involved in. And I was actually on track to be a CIO in GE actually, which I don't know whether that was a good thing or a bad thing actually, but anyway. But when you're actually operational as CIO, and the CIO's role has obviously been more and more important as technology has been embraced, this, like the right-hand man of the CFO and the CIO have very important roles. So that thing when you said solving the unsolvable, what were you thinking about when you made that phrase? Because it's quite an interesting opening gambit.
Yeah. So it's old guys, right? Back.
Old guys.
Yeah,
speak about yourself.
We're
speak about yourself,
when the
mate.
internet was built, right? So let me give you my perspective on what was unsolvable. And so not all industries, but wealth management, financial services in particular, but I know this is happening in medical and many different industries. So, there's a couple things that we've done as an industry and to, walk ourselves into a problem, in my humble opinion. And so really what you have is an innovation that has happened within vendors, and these innovative vendors that have come into the industry, in particular in the 2000s. And what they really drove was innovation, low cost, high feature. So high feature, low cost, and they really, whether it's CRMs or data.
You mean like the SaaS vendors that came in?
Yeah, the SaaS vendors, right?
Yeah.
Software as a service. And that just exploded. And especially in wealth management in the United States, just exploded in all these amazing, innovative technologies. Now, our firm early on came in and said, we're not going to, like many other firms, but ours uniquely in the wealth management space was one of the first to really say, what if we were not to build our own system? What if we were to become the hub that spoke all this together? And so we did massive innovation around a client-centric back office system that integrated with CRM, integrated with all these various systems. And so in the early days, I would do a lot of speaking around at conferences where I was kind of like beating the big firms, out pivoting them, and their development cycles were really long. And we were
you were like the speedboat, and they were like the tanker.
We're like, you know. And so we're using all these amazing. So like in our industry, in our space, I'm going to shout out a couple of them. For example, was Redtail Technology. No one even really knew much about them, but they were amazing CRM. And so we did a lot of integration with them, and we did a lot of integration with, at the time, Albridge, which was an up-and-coming data aggregator. And, so we were doing all these amazing things, and it was really cool.
So you were trying to create like a new operating model for that business segment.
Exactly. Yeah. Innovation. Now, what ends up happening was many years later, as I sit around kind of doing a risk assessment from a cybersecurity perspective, we're sitting around, we're talking about this, and we had been noticing a trend that was very negative, which was that the firms were focused on high feature, low cost, and that pyramid problem that you have when you move one thing, it's going to shift another. And cybersecurity in particular was a thing that wasn't being invested in infrastructure. And so we started noticing more and more risk around our data and data proliferation. So vendor shared it with vendor, shared it with vendor. Now, all of a sudden, my data was everywhere, but not only was it everywhere, it was on the open internet. And it was all one poor programming line away from being exposed. And, you had the Dropbox where somebody accidentally released a line of code and you can log into anybody's account. There's a clarity that software engineering, and this is going to be controversial as a software engineer, but software engineering isn't really software engineering. It doesn't have the same disciplines as traditional engineering, right? And so it's very iterative. It's designed on these models.
I love you giving me all these good one-liners. It's really going to rub it up.
It's great.
Well, hey,
any software engineer will tell you that. And if you watch any videos on Instagram, they make fun of these kind of development life cycles and the lack of predictability and of software and all these challenges we have in software. And so the main mechanism for securing everything on the open internet with my vendors was around software, and not only so they had not segmented my data. They had one central database, and there was poor design quality. And I'm not saying it's red.
Yeah, there's like single points of failure and things like that.
Single points of failure, right? And it was just poorly designed. But the problem was that there was more and more emphasis that I was responsible for for what was going on in their development. So it became clear that the regulators were going to kind of basically come down and say, listen, you own all of your vendors and you own all your vendors' mistakes, because here's the unsolvable problem. The unsolvable problem was these are unregulated entities delivering the lowest cost, highest feature technology with the most critical data that people have, that's just as valuable 10 years from now as it is today. Meaning, if you steal the data, even if it's encrypted, it's valuable to the hackers 10 years. So it's not like it needs to be hacked today and unencrypted. If they steal it today, they'll unencrypt it tomorrow. So when you started looking at quantum encryption and all the challenges coming, I was like, wait a minute, if my data is ever stolen, even if it's encrypted, financial wealth, who has it, where it's at, information is very, very valuable. And so you had basically.
So this is a quick question then. When you say data is available on the open internet, for somebody is that because that's assumption is a people are assuming that it's actually secure on the internet.
No, it's not, and everybody knows it's not. I mean, every zero-day attack proves that, right? So it's on the open internet. Any good CIO will tell you that the preference is not that their data is on the open internet. That wasn't an idea we woke up with one day and everybody's designed to because it was the most secure way and the right way to deliver technology to consumers. What really ultimately drove that decision is a risk management approach about, the risk management approach when you use, strength, weakness, opportunity, threat as a business. A lot of CIOs were making decisions based on competition, cost, and these decisions we were making as an industry were about delivering solutions to consumers, expectations of consumers, the iPhone and all these things driving expectation of performance. So all of a sudden people wanted this performance. They wanted this expectation that the consumer had, and you're in business and you're in profit. You have to meet these things, and you try to mitigate those risks. But posting API and enterprise data on the open internet wasn't something that anybody had in their bingo card in the 1990s, right? And I don't think it's anything anybody had in their bingo cards in the early 2000s that was a really good idea, right?
I mean, it's interesting. I mean, I don't know if you've heard about it, but literally, I was listening to the news today that in Northern Ireland there's been a breach. There's been a data breach with all the personal information of all the, I think it's the police officers for Northern Ireland.
Yeah, well, they had that in CalPERS in California, had a breach recently in their retirement system, and they're using that data to call. They're using that data to call everybody and trick old people into letting them into their bank accounts and stuff. So, the issue is that it's kind of like the reason they don't put banks on freeways. There's an idea of how hard you have to make it. And at the end of the day, I always use the analogy, and these are not great analogies that all engineers are going to love, but I do feel like everybody decided one day, let's put all the banks on the superhighways. Like it's like at the end of the day, you want to make it as hard as possible to rob the bank, and so you put it far away in the streets. They try to make these mitigations. Well, what's the mitigation for putting all your data on the open internet and only using software? And what software is anybody aware of within a stack of software that everybody could be like, oh yeah, this is secure, right? Because all it takes is another log4j.s to basically own your system. I didn't write log4j.s, nor did I write the operating system, but somehow.
So as a CIO, you say you're not really in control because it's like third parties that are working with you as business partners.
Yeah, well, it's third party. It's your vendors, right? So not only do I have my vendors who are low cost, high feature, trying to get things out, collecting all my data, and hosting my data, and then hosting it in multiple locations, but then the vendors they use. And then, so I just look at this problem going, okay, we can talk about the problem all day, right? But every problem like this, ultimately you want to come up with a risk management approach, right? So we're like, okay, so the regulators, whether the SEC or anybody, is going to try to put pressure on these small businesses. And they're going to put pressure on firms like ours to say, okay, well, we're going to fine you. You're responsible. You need to do this. Okay. Now, that's where the challenge is because my ability to, and most firms' ability to really drive these vendors, Salesforce or Office 365, or even the smaller vendors, and tell them what to do, right? So
that's easy. That's easy, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. And so we're like, okay, this is kind of a real big problem that's emerging. This is like literally 6 years ago, before any of this even hit the press. So we said, okay, what's the unsolvable problem? So we're like, okay, you know what we always needed on the internet, and we always knew, was when it came to enterprise data. Okay, when I'm talking about enterprise data, I'm talking about API designed to share mass amounts of data, not well-designed, microsegmented engineering. I'm talking about where you hack an API. You've got the enterprise ID and you get all the data, okay? Never should have been on the open internet on APIs, okay? So we are sitting back going, okay, well, what would be the right approach? And so it's like, wow, it'd be great, really great if we could have a Tor network or something for wealth management, some kind of place to put our data to host our data, to share APIs and do that. But of course, that wasn't an option at the time. So we're like, if I could have my vendors,
You mean like when you say Tor, you mean like the dark web?
Yeah, like that type of a network, a network that allowed you to not do VPNs, which are slow, and something that was a little more open, a little more distributed, not owned by any one major corporation, something that could be shared, something that was like the internet in the sense that we could all use it.
Some kind of principles, some principles that make it robust.
Principles of openness, principles of, some of the principles without necessarily. So it was like, well, if I could have my API actually exposed to me through these type of, because a lot of the firms we were working with, they're like, they don't want to do VPNs because it's special infrastructure. And then you try to do MPLS or private networks. It could take you 6 months to get one spun up, and they're really expensive. Cost doing business for them. It's support for them. So nobody wanted to do private networking, but everybody wanted to do private networking. There just was no platform. So
quick question, Aaron. If you fast forward, then I suppose I was just going to ask Mike to kind of explain a little bit about this as well. When Mike, you published this thing recently that you saw, and obviously I presume it's a raging conversation between you and Aaron about this SEC thing where they're trying to I won't say turn the screw, but they're kind of like making it even more important to be responsive and put some infrastructure in place to actually address the unsolvable problem that you mentioned. What was? Could you just explain to the audience a bit about the sentiment that came out of that thing that you shared, Mike, the other day?
Yeah, I think more than anything else, Andrew, the essence of a company being able to secure their data and their customers' data has now become, a governmental issue globally. And so, to Aaron's point, right, you can either beat on somebody and find them, or you could help them construct a way, to do this. And promote those kinds of philosophies and secure ways of doing things, not ideas, but just general guidelines that you have to follow them, because you can't tell people, do. So more than anything else, I thought it was interesting to share that because it's kind of one of the first statements that I've really heard that said, look, hey, you have X number of days to do certain things after a breach. And that became, I think, a very important statement to me because I deal with these customers and clients all the time. And I sometimes say to them things like, look, you're one hack away from disaster, right? That's really what you are. And so if you're not protecting your data, and as Aaron said, it's actually exposed on the internet, your liabilities potentially are very, very large, right? So bringing that into focus, I think, is important for people who control.
Yeah, and I think what the SEC is doing within they're going after regulated entities, but those regulated entities today, most of them don't even own their own infrastructure anymore, right? That's the unsolved. It's like, okay, and so I agree with the SEC's approach in this way, which is they're doing something that is communicating to the senior management that you need a risk management approach, okay? You need a risk management, and so that really elevates the way, whether it's a CEO certification and these different methodologies, to heighten the risk, to clarify the risk to the businesses, which is, the SEC is late to the game. I think everybody understands this, whether it was New York's enforcement and different state enforcements, and everybody understands the risk. The problem is, what's the solution? And so
But my experience working in banks and financial services over the last couple of decades is that the risk register, right, is what's the probability of it landing and what's the severity of, the impact. Yeah. So to my mind, are we saying now with this recent ruling that suddenly this, you think about the pop charts, with the, coming in at number 3 and now whooshing to number 1, are we saying that it's now put up the pop charts, in the CIO agenda, saying we need to have a way of solving this problem, and it's amplifying this issue? Because I mean, if I put 1,000 CIOs in a room with yourself, Aaron, would they know how to solve and be compliant to that new SEC ruling, or are they really on the back foot? Is that one of the burning issues we've got here?
it's a complex issue. And at the end of the day, the one thing this does is helps to clarify for those CIOs to their senior management the need to ingrain risk management decisions of where your data is held and how it's held in the decisions of the business. In the past, the CIO would lose debates because highest feature, lowest cost is what drove the business decision. Today, this helps to further the conversation, bring more power to the risk managers in the business to say to the CEO, yes, but here are your cyber risks. Here is the risk that you are facing by deploying this infrastructure. So businesses have switched a lot to these new digital transformations and all these type of things. And again, low cost, high feature.
That's a trendy thing to do.
Yeah, it's a trendy thing to do. And so you have CIOs today.
It's a good CV enhancer. I've been on 26 million digital transformations in my lifetime.
You know, we're a cloud business and we're all digital. And again, that's true. In fact, businesses today, you know, it's the old Netflix effect, don't even own their infrastructure, right? You can run a whole business on an idea and not even own. Back in the day, you know, Netflix was AWS, right? Okay. So,
you know, I don't even know. I feel actually a bit embarrassed actually because now my CV, right, which I dug out the other day, it doesn't have a digital transformation on it recently. So, you know, I should just put my feet up and retire, really, shouldn't I?
So all of these things, that's the good part of this, is that it helps to enhance the risk management decisions. So whether CO certification or anything like that. So where does Cleverdome and that kind of concept come into this? So then you can, for the first time, this technology became available that we became aware of at United Planners that allowed for not only a zero trust type network where you could do services rather than a VPN, you could set up gateways and microservices and route traffic to the vendors, and it could be shared environment. So it's a really powerful technology that came out of a company that was working in the MilGov space. And so we looked
It's
at
got
this
like a federal kind of military heritage of it.
Yeah, it does, exactly. And it's got a lot of heritage in that space. And so, and its heritage even comes from, broad spectrum encryption, RF stuff. And so it's got a really great innovation genesis to it. But the question then became, okay, for the first time, there was a technology, and this is where it really gets interesting, that not only encrypted your data, but improved performance. Now, in the early days, I actually won some awards around this at something called Orion Fuse, where we went in and we didn't say anything about the encryption. We just went in and showed how it actually was outperforming API calls over normal HTTP traffic. So we were showing them that hey, there's this new way of communicating with vendor-to-vendor communication. We ran these simulations to show that we were actually increasing performance. So, whoa. Wait a minute.
So it's safer and faster.
Well, we didn't say the safer part, right? We're just like, hey, because people make decisions based on low cost type features. So we're like, hey, what if the feature just was faster and it's a private network? Okay. And everybody's like, wow, this is really cool. Everybody's blown away by it. And then we described the encryption, the packet, all that. It's like, oh my gosh. And it's factorially more secure. Okay. So that was kind of the genesis was the network. And then it became, but the problem is, again, with a network is who really wants to go on something and then you get controlled by the entity, whether it's, AWS concerns. And so nobody wants to be AWS. They want to be cloud of cloud now. They want to be cross because everybody's concerned about control. And so the internet provides you this kind of free world in which nobody can control your network and clients communication with you in theory.
Because you inherit what the vendors have actually put into their infrastructure as
That's
a roll
right. You're
up
not
and
having
aggregation.
to do anything special to communicate with them, and you can spin up tomorrow and all this kind of stuff. So we're like, okay, now how do we build an infrastructure or an environment in which vendors can now share this and use this technology as a community? And so that's where the second innovation came from. Is we were one of the first companies, I think, in the world to say that taking consumer information off the internet is a public benefit. And so we declared that as a public benefit and we made a B Corp. Now, why does that matter? Well, B Corps are unique in the sense that you can declare the benefit and then the board And the board is now a fiduciary to the benefit, which is important to ensuring that if you're going to participate in this company, that the company must act in the best interest of the benefit that's stated, or the board of directors. So that was the first thing, is like, okay, if we're going to all use this network and kind of get off the open internet, where can we do it in a company that we can trust, that would have to act in our and the public's best interest? Okay, so the B Corp. The second thing we did, we said, okay, well, what if we were to build a co-op? And so the cooperative then allowed us to create a structure within the B Corp that these entities could then join, and that created a unique capability of aligning the interest of the vendor with me, the regulated entity. So now we could all agree to meet a minimum standard, not the standard, a minimum standard. Then through a co-op, there could be an agreement that both sides would say, yeah, we're going to meet these minimum standards. And then by both sides agreeing to meet this minimum standard through a B Corp, there was now an entity and a framework in which wealth management in the United States could start to take its data off the open internet through a faster, more secure communication channel, and start to a new paradigm that could also kind of act as a self-regulatory organization. In other words, it allowed vendors to opt in to meeting minimum standards and being part of a co-op to get the advantage of using this network. So we got a lot of buy-in in the early days of this with TD Ameritrade, Orion, Redtail, Risk Allies, and several other vendors to kind of participate in this model and say, hey, this could be a really great way of moving forward. Regretfully, like anything, with COVID, as well as the Schwab acquiring TDA and kind of taking away our major partner, it caused a little bit of a slowdown in the adoption of the idea. I think fundamentally the idea of the B Corp, the co-op, and a secure network. And then recently we did a network of networks. So not only have the MilGov one, but we did our own open source one, so that both networks could communicate together. So more choice, more openness, and kind of saying, well, what if we were to allow for any network multiple choices, but they can all communicate? So,
and just a quick question. So the whole of United Planners, all the advisors, all the corporate staff, they're all within this dome construct now. So they're all secure.
While Cleverdome as a concept still, is something that the community at large and around the world should look at its conceptual organizational structure and what it did, and it can be used to handle this problem, this unsolvable problem of how you get your vendors to agree to meet a minimum standard, and also doing so have a mechanism to keep your data off the open internet without the high cost of VPN stand-ups and all that kind of craziness.
One of the questions that's really interesting. I mean, one of the phrases that you used a bit earlier on, and maybe I don't know if Mike can explain this as well as yourself, but this phrase that it's kind of like I'll use a lot is zero trust. So, Mike, what would you describe as zero trust if you look at it through your lens, and then maybe get Aaron to explain it through zero trust as well? Just see. I'm assuming they're going to reconcile, but there's all these buzzwords you get.
It's a big word. Yeah, zero trust. That's zero trust is more than just the network. But go ahead, Mike.
So there's many people have many views of zero trust, but our view and my view is really with the United Planners implementation of it. So if you went to the United Planners website and you were if you're a member of the community, as Aaron describes it, and you're under the dome as prescribed and as approved by the organization, then you have access through a device, whatever that device is, to the information that United Planners makes available to you. Okay, so and it's under the dome, so it's fast, flexible. Every device is on 24/7. There's no VPN sign on. There's a whole structure that's behind it, including, by the way, compliance and sort of forensics that are brought into play if necessary. So that's what I call zero trust. If I go to a trade show, there's 500 people saying I've got zero trust, right from somebody saying, hey, I've got a little client on the device, to I have this big network behind this curtain somewhere that protects things. So
Yeah.
I have a very kind of
there's a lot of vendors out there. There's a lot. The big boys, Cisco, et cetera, that are all, somebody to get a call. There's basically a lot of vendors out there, the big boys and the up and coming startups who are making big claims. But it sounds like what you've done is crack some. If you combined something from the open source world, something from the military world, and combine that together, and actually implemented it. Sounds like, Aaron, in a very highly regulated use case.
Yeah,
and it sounds like you've done that. You've been one of the very early adopters and embracing that. It sounds like you've actually taken a risk by doing it, but it's actually you've done something quite innovative.
Yeah, a lot of the big boys are talking about zero trust as it relates to enterprise firms. Okay, so they're all in the space of protecting the Dells and the major corporations of the world, and that's a very complex problem to solve, and that's what they solve. But what we're looking at is SMB market and then a shared network. So most of these other networks are designed to be for a company, but this network and this idea was about creating an entity in which it could be shared among a community. No trust in the sense that everybody, devices, from a no trust perspective, at the minimum, known devices, known users, secure network, not on the open internet. Now, it goes beyond that. Gartner and a lot of different people, and everybody's trying to make money on the concept, right? Because it does go beyond that, all the way down to where you store the data and how you store it, and access controls down, okay? But as a CIO that has, my primary focus is on business solutions, and we're all looking for the 80-20 and back to the problem of high cost, high feature, or low cost, low feature. What I just did at United Planners by taking all of my critical infrastructure off the open internet. So United Planners today is utilizing this infrastructure that anybody can use, which is first, right? So it's not mine. I'm just in it like anybody else could be, to take my website and my API and the data I own, not my vendor's data, but my data, and I was able to take it off the open internet in a way that we know the devices, we know the security posture of the devices, and we authorize this secure device and the user. So we're able to authenticate device posture, user, and then through a secure network, they're able to access it. Now, what's core to this is it's the network on the device has many services. And so it's able to communicate by over multiple gateways to vendors. So we have some vendors that have their gateways, and then we're able to do IP restriction for those gateways to secure that data. We do have some data with some vendors that's not on the open internet. So I actually have some vendors I've been able to go to and say, hey, I love your technology. There's no way you're going to pass our cybersecurity. I'm not working with you on the open internet. So they were able to take all of our infrastructure, deploy it with API, do SaaS, but my data with them is not on the open internet, right? So now all of a sudden I've got access to really cool technology, emerging technology, but it's not on the open internet. So I don't have that risk where that vendor would have never been able to sell that technology to me because they don't have nearly enough resources to put their data on the open internet. So,
and just a quick question: Are you seeing now the vendors that you talked about before? The larger ones, the innovative ones, the startups, scale-ups, etc. Are they now starting to get it? What you've built with this Cleverdome solution is a penny dropping for them, or is it? Is there still a journey to go?
Yeah, it's a lot of journey. So a lot of them are like a lot of people are already in AWS. So just doing AWS VPCs between vendors is more common today than it was 4 years, 5 years ago. A lot of people, are resistant to this still to this day, and I think it's because they're resistant to it in a way that doesn't completely make sense to me. But the reason they're resistant to it is ultimately the pressure's not on them, right? And that goes back to where this conversation started. So at the end of the day, they have to deliver as low cost.
Oh, I see. So what you're saying is if the SEC put the gun turret, so to speak, at the tech vendors,
it would change overnight, but they can't.
Yeah, that's interesting, isn't it?
That's unsolvable. That's the problem.
That's another good set. We've got a few sound bites here. We've got solve the unsolvable. We've got your comment about the engineers, which I'm not going to repeat. Then we've obviously got the one that Mike did.
Which one
well.
are you not going to repeat? Software engineers.
I'm not the one you were talking about. The way that what is it? Software engineering is not really real engineering. I think it was.
Well, yeah, but you know, if any software engineer has a problem with that, then they're not telling the truth.
Right.
Yeah, because there are a few software engineers, and they build rocket ships and things like that, and bridges, and computer chips and things like that. When it comes to software and the way software is designed today, it's just a reality. And I think we have to be, Andrew, put it out there, because, you know, we have to be honest about software engineering and how it's done, right? And what it is, because it is software engineering that's controlling the crown jewels of the company. Okay.
Well, it's back to the Mark Andreessen quote, isn't it? Software's eating the world, unfortunately. But you got to manage the software, and you got to control it, and you got to engineer it properly. Otherwise, there's going to be risk involved in it. So,
and here's the problem: software engineering has a cultural problem, right? So it has an engineering problem, being software stack, which is a very complex problem, from all the way up the stack and how you're going to protect it, which is, in my humble opinion, not capable of ever being protected. Not for enterprises to share all of your data. Maybe for doing social media posts, you know, use the internet. But for
social media platforms are the future, as we all know, right? So we're going to be posting this on Instagram, you know, obviously X or Twitter or whatever Elon calls it, etc., etc.
Protecting Facebook posts. We're talking about protecting people's most confidential and personal information, and it's being engineered in the same way that people engineer social media websites, right? And so whether it's and so the challenge is that you have a lot of people who are really dedicated to security that are in software engineering, but the way software engineering is done, the pressure that software engineers are under to deliver, and the underlying platforms that they use, and the cost of all of it is a fundamentally, I'm going to use, in my humble opinion, to this day, still broken and not solvable, which is why that infrastructure is really cool to use over secure private networking. Use the MPLS, use a VPN, use something where you're not sharing critical enterprise data on the open internet. It's just obvious. Now, the question was, historically, there was no mechanism to do that was cost efficient, easy to deploy, and get done in minutes. Now, luckily, AWS and some of the cloud providers are coming up with some really cool solutions, and I think those should be considered. So if you are in software engineering and you're doing API today and you're not doing it over private networking, you're making a mistake. But Cleverdome was unique in the sense that it was using this technology, and it did it through a B Corp that must be a fiduciary to you. So if you are taking your data off the open internet, there was...
it's not just about the software. It's about how you structure the organization for accountability.
That's right, accountability. And that was what I was concerned about. So I was protecting myself from myself. If I'm going to go and put my data and my infrastructure under this entity, I wanted to know that in the future, if I was gone as a fiduciary to my company, that the entity that I had used to take my data off the open internet must act as a fiduciary to me, right? The whole financial services industry is a fiduciary industry. We're all fiduciary to the consumer from the top down. The person who is not a fiduciary to the consumer is the vendors that the financial services entity is using, okay? They're not. But by bringing them into an entity like Cleverdome, they're agreeing to become a fiduciary, a partial partner in my obligation to be a fiduciary to my consumers. That's what makes Cleverdome unique, is the fact that we have a network, which is cool, and a network of network, which is cool. But at the end of the day, if you're going to do that with a vendor, having the vendor come in and agree to meet a minimum standard and act as a fiduciary in partnership with you in delivering services to you, that solves that unsolvable problem that the SEC is struggling with.
It's definitely a different model. It makes it more accountable, doesn't it? So
it makes it more accountable, and I think that's the approach: is getting a framework through a co-op, a B Corp, at minimum, to start to say, yeah, I have agreed as a vendor, and so vendors can differentiate themselves. So the other thing Cleverdome did, and there's still another way to improve this as an industry, is we did develop a minimum standard, and we came up with a vendor due diligence process to have the vendors that join Cleverdome adhere to a minimum standard. Again, trying to figure out what the floor is, right? Because today it's not clear what the floor is. Now, a lot of people, as you know, Andrew, are spending a lot of money and a lot of time, and Mike can attest to this, on trying to build the perfect vendor due diligence program, okay? But again, that's all necessary. But where does the vendor have a mechanism to agree to become a fiduciary with you in the fiduciary obligation chain that we all have to the consumer?
It's a bit like how do you create a structure where you're all chained together? You're all in it. You're all in it together. I mean,
that's right. I mean, so by creating Cleverdome, you created a SRO without creating an SRO. So if you think about FINRA and it's like these are entities that are willing to say, hey, we're going to meet a minimum standard. We're going to become obligated with everybody within this entity, and we are going to agree. So I think the unique problem to solve, Andrew, was that problem, which is what the SEC is not solved, and I don't think they can solve without some government. And that's probably, at some point, maybe a government just decides to say all vendors who serve whatever industry are now under our authority, right? Which they could do. And I think one of the reasons a lot of these vendors were interested in Cleverdome is it allowed people to self-obligate themselves versus waiting for the inevitable, which is probably going to happen if Cleverdome is not successful or another concept like it is not successful. I suspect in the near future that the next maneuver will be that all vendors, by definition, who serve a certain industry will be regulated by the regulator of that industry.
Mandated, effectively.
Yeah, because it's the inevitable. It has to be, because as the regulators start understanding that, most where the data is at, who's giving us the data, and they're going to put as much pressure on us as possible. But the continued breaches and things, I think it probably makes sense and arguable that the SEC should be regulating these vendors, right? At this point.
That's really interesting. I think what you've been today is really articulate in A, what the problem is, B, explaining it about, it's not just about the software, but it's also about how you set it up organizationally. And I suppose, for any CIOs that are listening, as a person that was supposed to be a CIO but never made it, so obviously you're ahead of me on that one, Aaron, that, I suppose understanding a bit more about United Planners, maybe you can put some stuff on that in the show notes. Because it sounds like you've done some innovative stuff, and you're quite innovative from that point. You're looking at how do you kind of change the game as a business model. And then I suppose from yourself, Mike, is, maybe we can share some stuff around what Cleverdome's doing in a bit more detail. I presume you've got a website and etc. We can share some information as part of publishing this episode, because I think it's a really interesting topic you've been working on, and it's not easy. It's pretty complex. But it sounds like you've actually worked out a way to solve it, which is fantastic.
Well, and I'll let Mike kind of close it out. But, Andrew, it's important, kind of back to United Planners. I said that these were independent businesses. So, again, there are a lot of companies out there with technologies where you can force your businesses, like, if you're a major company. But all these devices are connecting to all this data that I own, not my devices, okay? Not my devices, owned by a business, small to medium-sized business, some large businesses. This is whether you're talking about medical, legal. This is the world we live in today, which is an ecosystem in which it's not all controlled by a company who can mandate everything on everybody, right? And so there are those entities around there to this day where they have vendors and they can mandate their vendors. But then they're mandating those vendors to do something for them, but those vendors have other vendors. And so United Planners has been successful in working with independent businesses to convince them to meet minimum standard, work with independent vendors to convince them to meet minimum standards, because we created an entity called Cleverdome that was independent of my firm, that is a benefit corporation, that has a co-op and has amazing technology so they get the benefit of speed. So there is a straw man or a steel man, however you want to look at it, for a way forward for small to medium-sized businesses that don't have the budgets and are not interested in and cannot force people to do things, but want to find a way to raise all ships together. United Planners has been successful at doing it and moving forward in this direction. We have a long ways to go. And, Mike is a CEO at Cleverdome, and I kind of rely on him to continue to develop innovation and new partners. And so, Mike, you can kind of talk about what you're doing.
Yeah. So Cleverdome so it's www.cleverdome.com is the website. There's a telephone number on there that if you leave a message, we get that immediately. Um, the big thing, Andrew, I think for the message right now is that over the years we've expanded the offering to security audits, compliance, vendor due diligence. We have now forensic capabilities. So if somebody has a hack or a breach, we have that expertise available. We've also got agreements now with MSSPs that have full stack solutions that integrate with what we do. There's many offerings that Cleverdome has right now. And so, for example, I'll give you just a quick example. We're dealing with a company right now that had a ransomware attack. We went in, we did security audits, we did compliance, we did forensics, and now Cleverdome is going to be the platform that they implement to secure their data, just as Aaron's been talking about. It's a very dramatic turn for a company that just went, well, my information's out there, I'm assuming it's safe. And that was a very bad assumption. So, and
that's fantastic. That's fantastic.
Yeah. So that's where we are.
Yeah, so fantastic. So thank you very much for coming on today's episode. So today's special episode, and sharing the story. And it sounds like you've got some real progress. And look forward to watching the progress of Cleverdome into the future. And thanks for sharing your story, Aaron. It's really interesting to hear someone who's actually at the front line sharing, embracing something and actually getting something implemented. And thanks for coming on the show to Aaron and Mike. That was Aaron Spradlin, CIO of United Planners, and Mike Hallett, who's the CEO of Cleverdome. And that was Andrew Turner, founder and host of the G&T Sessions podcast. Have a lovely day. Thanks very much.
Thank you.